Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. Sorry for the slightly late start. So this session's panel discussion is about the effect of social media on design practice. More specifically than that, if, how, and why Instagram is affecting the smell of today's perfumery. The principle may first appear a bit ridiculous and removed. Another one of those perfume people trying to make the whole world revolve around perfume. But it is impossible to deny that Instagram is becoming incredibly influential on how and why we act, grounded by the growing plethora of research into how social media is affecting psychology, mental health, and interpersonal tendencies. What kind of experiences we choose to prioritize, what types of objects we choose to glorify, what kind of inquiries we choose to undertake, even down to what kind of ideas gain weightier currency in the share-for-likes economy in which recognition and reciprocity are often lauded over progression and transformation. For this example, and a quick political aside, think of President Donald Trump. It's worth noting that not all the research findings are solely negative. For example, a correlation between improved mental health and social media use by encountering photos and articles about physical exercise. But a common thread is that social media increases the likelihood of being dissatisfied, confused, or anxious about the real world, in much the same way that overuse of pornography has been linked to diminished arousal by real-life experiences with real-life people. A common explanation can be offered by the logic that digital worlds are simple, two-dimensional, physically but also emotionally, and singular, but our world is complex and volatile. We become addicted to an easier, smoother form of cognition, where passions, desires, dreams, and fears are all simplified as absolute, compartmentalized, and let's not forget, visual. So just to put the influence of Instagram into some context, there are 800 million monthly active users of Instagram as of late 2017, which was their last official counting. It is predicted that this figure will hit 1 billion this year. There are 500 million daily active users, and 59% of Instagram users are 18 to 29 years old, so they would be classified by many as millennials. To help think through the topic, we've got four great panelists, each with a different leaning in the industry, who I'll introduce now. So to my immediate left is Marta de Leonardis, who is a social media expert who began working in the world of digital content in 2007, dealing in the business of ringtones. She worked as a telecoms consultant, cutting her teeth at Vodafone, and has also distributed independent music. She joined Open Influence in 2016, where she is currently sales director. They put brands in contact with influencers. Next along is Sarah Baker, a London-based contemporary artist whose work explores desire and fantasy through the creation of fictional characters. Sarah Baker Perfumes is an extension of Baker's artistic practice, where the scents themselves evoke glamorous characters and lavish settings. Baker completed her MA in Fine Art at Goldsmiths College and BFA at the San Francisco Art Institute. Following her is Alex Lee, a perfumer at Man who attended the University of California in San Diego and trained in perfumery at the Grass Institute of Perfumery, a SIPCA, and Man's Internal Fine Fragrance Perfumery School. And last but not least, at the end of the table is Andy Tower, who came to perfumery about 15 years ago. He's based in Switzerland and has a background in chemistry and consulting. He is self-trained and not affiliated with any other player in the industry, enjoying total creative freedom, which sounds pretty idyllic. He entered the niche market with Tower Perfumes in 2005. Thanks for being here today. So before we get into the panel discussion, I want to introduce the topic for about 7 to 10 minutes by quoting a Smithsonian article written by journalist Emily Matchar in quite some depth. Its subject is the process through which Instagram is actively changing creative design and decision-making strategy in the minds of restaurateurs, chefs, gallery curators, and hospitality professionals, and is the perfect springboard to parallel our discussion today about Instagram and fragrance. The article's tagline is, "As neighborhoods, restaurants, and museums become more photogenic, are we experiencing an Instagramization of the world?" What follows is an analysis of how the parameters and expectations created by the Instagram framework are influencing not just what we like to look at, but also what consumers are demanding across different product categories, and more generally, how we move through daily life, what we choose to turn our attentions to, where we go, and how long we spend there. Matchar states, "It's part of a wider phenomenon of public and private spaces being designed to appeal to users of such apps. This phenomenon is subtly changing our visual landscapes, on the streets, in restaurants, in museums, and more. Restaurants have become lighter and brighter. Candlelight may be romantic, but it doesn't make for good food photography. Restaurant designers are going for photo-friendly background materials like slate and whitewashed wood, and using plain white plates. Some are deliberately incorporating Instagram-appealing visuals that feature the restaurant's name or logo, floor tiles, neon signs, hoping they'll wind up in a snap. Chefs even cop to creating dishes specifically designed to go viral. Rainbow-colored unicorn food, over-the-top stunt food, anything wrapped in bacon." This is the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, and she reported that they recently rearranged mirrors in its decorative arts gallery to make mirror selfies easier, while San Francisco's Museum of Modern Art added terraces designed as selfie spots. Later in the article, Matchar notes in reference to the popularization of top 10 lists for most Instagrammable places in Paris, most Instagrammable places in London. Instagram seems to be changing what aspects and elements of a city travelers find worthwhile. These aren't places that people, tourists or locals, would have necessarily been likely to spend time in before Instagram. The key takeaway is that the formal aspects of the archetypal Instagram image, which I propose, are strong architectonics, minimalist settings, few objects of interest, shallow monochromatic planes, high definition, bright contrasting colors, compositional symmetry, and emotional immediacy, as seen as an example of like this. I don't know, I kind of thought this was the typical Instagram image. You can argue with me later. That these are not simply fostering design that encourages photo taking, but also what people want designed objects and experiences to mean to them and how they are used, often fitting into tropes like selfies, or an overhead shot of your feet in the sand, or a symmetrical snap of your acai and kale bowl, that contributes to a cultural condensation of big ideas into shorthand memes, hashtags, emojis, where complex and thought-provoking images are relegated in favor of quickly likable, simply structured, immediately knowable, usable, absolute visuals that hint at sex and fantasy, but clearly demonstrate social status through which one curates their own vanity. This theory is rooted in the politics of the senses, the idea that our cognition is not neutral and uninfluenced by the senses, but the emphasis on a certain sense can actually change the way we think and embellish, reroute, and subvert understanding and desire. Instagram culture promotes visuality as the prime cultivator for knowledge and satisfaction, and the politics of visuality in the sense of how it influences thought patterns and how it has historically been used are problematic and, in my view, not synergistic for perfumery, potentially resulting in worse, simpler, anti-intellectual fragrances. In short, Instagram is bad for fragrance. Visuality encourages conceptualization of objectivity, of encapsulation, of transparency of structure, and ownership. So we are to believe that what we are seeing is truly reality, and if we have seen it, then we know it and own that memory as an accurate representation of the world. Whereas, think about for a minute the prospect of having no other senses apart from the sense of smell. So we don't have eyes, we don't have ears, or we can't feel touch. And how differently we would act, and what alternative kind of meanings we would cultivate if we didn't have eyes. Unable to form a notion of objective reality through images, a smell-only human would likely dwell on the same kind of themes that the fragrance industry likes to promote: intimacy, sex, repulsion, nature, humanity. But olfactory cues are always recognized as too subjective to impose absolute truths, and therefore always retain their cognitive complexity. Visuality, as done the Instagram way, encourages simple visual design in terms of composition and potentially also in terms of response that is influencing other design practices to synchronize with an Instagram way of thinking. There is a trend within perfumery for simpler compositions in terms of naturality, clarity, easily understandable, legible structures without olfactory clutter. So my question is there any chance that this Instagram culture is catalyzing the trend for simple fragrances and explains why so many scents smell the same today? So we'll go to the panel now. And the first thing I want to ask is to Marta, just to explain a little bit about the history of Instagram, where we are today, and where you think it's going in the future.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for inviting me here. I would say that Instagram in this moment has made a big step farther. At the beginning was just a place where you just posted your vacation, nice pictures about your life. Then you had pictures, for example, when we talked about perfumes, we just had photos that were still lifes, and the person was never seen in that. We just focused on the product. In this moment, with the launch of Instagram stories, is more about experience. Brands are using Instagram not only to express the product, but the value of the brand. So we have, for example, experiences in the industries, in the perfumery labs, to understand how those perfumes are made. So it's much more about storytelling now. I would not say it is just product placement in this moment. It's more about experience. It's more about what the influencer thinks about personally about the perfume. And the art part of finding the right influencer for the brand is to understand if it really is adapt and he has a target that can listen and is interested in that kind of product, in that kind of perfume in this case. This means that it's not useful to do a campaign with some fashion or some beauty influencer that do not endorse the values of the brand. So in this moment, we are, is more an experiential social media than other.
And to follow on from that, I'm interested in your ideas on what Instagram will look like and how people will use it in 10, 20 years. I mean, what do you think is the future of how people are engaging with brands on Instagram?
I do think that in 10 years, maybe Instagram and Facebook will be one big social media. And with the introduction of e-commerce, it would be really an e-commerce place more than a social media. And of course, the age of the people and the users would be much more higher than in actual days. So nowadays we have 18, 29 core users. And 10 years ago, if we think about it, Facebook users at that age. So in my thoughts, in 10 years, we will have a 35, 45 public for Instagram that will be loyal to that kind of social media.
Yeah, thank you for making that point. I think it's particularly interesting, actually, as millennials are often blamed for being the generation with the lowest attention span. They can't concentrate for 2 seconds and need that immediacy. So if Instagram were to proliferate their demographics, I think it would change the types of images being produced. I mean, in terms of throwing it across to the rest of the panel, I'm just interested very simply in your personal experiences of social media and Instagram in particular, given that you work in the fragrance industry. Like, is it useful for you? Has it benefited your role in the industry and your business, or have you found it to be a negative presence at any point?
I actually remember when the collections feature came up, and actually that was a really important part of Instagram for me, being able to save posts and then categorize them in collections. I don't know if anybody here does that, but I have quite a lot of categories saved in my Instagram account because I use Instagram as a visual artist. I'm so inspired by the visuals, and I use it like a magazine, you know. I use it to find out news, you know, that sort of thing. So a lot of my Instagram activity is actually as a viewer and a voyeur, as opposed to a publisher. But, you know, obviously there's the publishing aspect as well, which is extremely useful, I think. Some posts more than others. I mean, when you have a complicated perfume or work of art or something that's has to be actually experienced, I just think Instagram is extremely useful to be able to promote and draw in audiences, like today, for instance. So, you know, but I definitely do think there's an oversimplification of things. In particular, one thing that I do know about is, in terms of women's beauty, is eyebrows. Somebody pointed out, somebody pointed out to me, who doesn't use Instagram or the internet very much recently, he had seen a picture of a woman with very, very big, dark eyebrows, and he said, what happened to this? What happened to skinny eyebrows? What happened to that? Now everybody's eyebrows are so big. And I think there's actually so much emphasis right now for some reason on the eyebrows, and it's like Instagram ready face sort of thing. So it definitely does influence, and I think it definitely does simplify things. Sometimes when you see people who have an Instagram ready selfie face in person, it's a little bit shocking because there's quite a bit of makeup happening there, yeah. But it looks fantastic on Instagram with the nice filter over it.
What about you guys? How do you feel about Instagram?
Well, I started using Instagram about 2 years ago, I think, and it was recommended to me by actually a client of mine, and she said, "Andy, you must try it, you will love it." And it came right at the time when I was really tired of Facebook. And for me, it was a revelation, actually, because I like to communicate through pictures, I learned. It changed a lot, how I think about the brand, how I think about how to present the brand. I started to think in categories of, is this part of my life that I want to share Instagrammable, which I find totally fascinating. So it's not only a one-way communication, it's also kind of affecting the way I'm thinking about how I present myself and my perfumes and how I combine the two things together and why this is important, etc., etc.
Hi, everyone. So I was actually born in the Silicon Valley, so very far away from all the perfume capitals. For me, my notion of perfumery was that it was an object that was dropped in front of Sephora by a stork, like the baby and the stork, and then the salesperson would come out and take the bottle and put it on the shelf. And that was my idea how perfume was created. We didn't have documentaries about Grasse or perfumers, and even though that we were the first to have the internet, the information was still very far away from us. So I remember later on in my life, and it took a while before I read this amazing article by Chandler Burr. It was actually, I think, 2007, in which he followed Jean Carolina and in one of his creations, and he wrote this expose about the life of a perfumer and how a perfumer creates. And this was the first time that I understood the humanity in this art, and there was a man or a woman behind a perfume. And it was a revelation for me. And it's so obvious now that we're inside and now that we have all this information. But for me, being a young boy in California, I had no idea that this was possible and there was an actual job. For me, I guess I live a regret that I wish I had this information when I was earlier, so I could have maybe started Perfumery earlier. But I use Instagram more of a personal, for a personal reason. I think it's for the young perfumery students of tomorrow. For me, I just want to give them hope, and I want to show them that there is hope and that there is a chance. You know, I never thought it would be possible, and I just wanted to symbolize that even a young boy who was so far away, who had parents who never wore perfume, is able to make it in this perfumery world. So it's very symbolic for me.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And a common thread I see is that Instagram is very useful for engaging people in ideas that they wouldn't otherwise encounter, and also taking people to physical locations. Sorry, Andy, you want to say something?
I would like to ask you a question, because I think this is very important. So you read a book, okay? And this book is a different medium, okay? So it transports information in a different way. I am worried that people who follow me on Instagram get an idea of how it is like to be a perfumer and how to create a perfume that is not really corresponding to reality, compared to when you read a book where people really go into details. So my question to you is, imagine you would have had Instagram 10 years ago. You think you would still have gone the same way, or wouldn't you have been like facing the wall because you realized, Jesus, this is not reality, what I've seen?
That's a great question. I think what's really important about social media today is transparency. I think this industry has been in the shadows for way too long. And I think there was something very beautiful in the mystery. I think our industry lived and thrived on the mystery and keeping it secret. But I think we as curious human beings, we want to know more. And I think the result would have been the same. But I understand your point. And, but that's absolutely a good question.
No, but I think that most of the points you've raised are particularly apt here. And if I bring it back to my thesis a little bit, which I know is a bit controversial, Instagram is creating simpler fragrances. The way I see it, there are two cultural links, really. One that Andy identified, which is that it's a quick turnover culture. Like, for example, Andy, the other day you uploaded a short video of you cellophaning bottles, and I gave it a like, but I probably looked at it for about 2 seconds, and then I moved on, and I never thought about you cellophaning bottles like for the rest of the week. So I think you raise an interesting point. It's quick consumption. And the point that Alex raises about transparency, perhaps this is a little bit too much of a projection, but there has been for a long time a call for consumers about greater education, transparency of the industry, and I think many would agree that that has translated into how perfumers have used materials, in the sense of making compositions not more simplistic, but calling forth materials and calling out materials more strongly to give it some sort of legitimacy. A Rose de May, for example, a Jasmine de Grasse, or a particular grade of vetiver, and brands have been doing this for a long time. So my kind of idea and my question to you is do you think that this, the transparency that Instagram cultivates is in any way changing what consumers are wanting from your fragrances, and therefore how you formulate?
I don't formulate perfumes, so.
Sorry, I have only an attention span of 5 seconds. What was your question?
Do you think that the culture of transparency and quick consumption is changing what consumers want their fragrances to smell like? Do they want them to be easier to consume, quicker to understand, and therefore simpler, or not?
No, I don't think so. But what they want is they want perfumes that enhance their social status. Okay? And you don't get this by transparency. You get this by building a glamour world, making things exclusive, making it hard to get, making it pricey, so that when you can do the selfie with the bottle, everybody knows you have spent $400. Does this answer your question?
No, it doesn't. And part of the reason I wanted you on the panel is, I'm not sure if you would accept this, but I feel like your perfumery in general can be classed as quite complex, quite nuanced. You use a lot of materials. So it's very much in contrast to the kind of trends I'm referring to. And I didn't make it explicit, but I reference brands here like Jo Malone London or Atelier Cologne or this kind of style, where for them, they want to communicate luxury and legitimacy through simple, clear structures, which not all brands take.
Excellent question, by the way. So Instagram for me is a reminder every day that we are catering to a world, a population of people who are overwhelmed by noise and choices. And Instagram for me is a reminder that I have to push the aesthetic envelope, that I have to create perfumes of high signature, or else my idea is going to be lost in the masses. So it does affect my creativity, and it does affect my design, because people are tired and people are overwhelmed, and people want perfumes that speak to you very quickly. In the perfume world, every day there is this term in evaluation that we always use is lisible, which means readable. And I'm always critiqued on if my perfume is lisible. And we always in creation talk about pillars when we create sandalwood vanilla. And do we smell enough of sandalwood, and do we smell enough of vanilla? And I think that's why the success of Jo Malone is very important to be studied, because it's understandable. We smell the pear and the freesia, whatever, in the way that we imagine it, but it's very clear. And so in a certain way, I can't say that I formulate simpler, but I try to formulate so that people understand my perfumes very quickly, and that my story is very clear. And again, the perfume is sold within the first 2 or 3 seconds, so it needs to be very clear in message.
In terms of the difference of how trends have changed, for me, what you're saying is one of the big touchstones. Of course, we've always had to catch a consumer's attention with top notes, but for me, there's a slight difference. Maybe people don't put as much emphasis necessarily on the idea of a olfactory triangle, and the top notes have to catch your attention, but exactly what you said, this concept of risible, like readability. In terms of, Sarah, your experience, I'm interested in if you feel like you're using a different part of your brain or a different like emotional capacity when thinking as a visual artist, and then when thinking as a head of your brand and as an evaluator in the perfumery world. Could you talk a little bit about the differences between working in the two fields?
I mean, I don't actually feel like it's very different, to be honest.
Why is that?
Well, because I'm always just trying to achieve a vision of some kind, you know, whether it be an olfactory vision or a vision of a photograph or a script. But I'm really interested in this notion of collaboration that I wanted to talk about, in particular the Byredo project that I mentioned, which is, you guys probably saw the elevator music. I thought that was a really interesting intersection between fashion and art and perfume. And I think in the last few years, because of Instagram, we've had a lot more of these types of collaborative things happening in terms of like Pharrell Williams has curated art shows for Basel, Miami, and like these types of kind of, you know, Beyonce goes to art fairs and like these types of things. But I thought the elevator music by Byredo, the Ben Gorham and Virgil Abloh, who is a like streetwear designer for a brand called Off-White. And he's also up and coming. I think he's just been appointed the menswear designer for Louis Vuitton. And he collaborated with Ben Gorham for Byredo, and they made this art installation that was actually created by Karsten Haller, who's like one of, you know, the world famous artists, super cutting edge. And I couldn't find anywhere what does this perfume smell like on Instagram. I mean, I went on everybody's account. And so I thought that was kind of interesting, because it wasn't really about like, here's a perfume that smells like something. It was like, here is a sort of intersection of all of these creative worlds, so that they can all be tagged on Instagram, you know, because that's the thing too, is like, I think tagging and hashtagging and all of that type of thing is so important to draw in an audience. And it almost seems like this perfume, this whole project in some ways was created in order to get an Instagram kind of hype.
So on that point then, I mean, I can see how Instagram can be very inspiring, how it can draw people to perfume brands and to perfume concepts. But do you think visual means through Instagram are useful for communicating olfactory ideas with some kind of specificity? For example, with Andy, when you're trying to evoke the feeling or the kind of texture or the concept of one of your fragrances on Instagram, do you feel that people can understand that? Or do you feel that it in some way makes them more austere to the fragrance because you're describing a story but they still have no clue what it smells like?
Well, the cool thing about pictures is you can communicate a chapter of a book with one picture. Okay, I have one perfume. Some of you know it. It's called L'air du désert marocain, air from the Moroccan desert. I mean, you can make one picture, place the bottle there, and people know what the fragrance is all about without me saying one word. That's fantastic, you know. And what I see is the discourse goes the longer the more, at least for my channel, in that direction. I produce a picture where I kind of try to bring in the core values of what I see in a fragrance, what was the inspiration, what was the world that I was dreaming around this perfume or for this perfume, and I tried to fit this into a picture, and people get it. Yeah.
In terms of going like even deeper than that, do you guys have any thoughts on what style, type, family, or category of fragrances is easier to evoke through visual means and through Instagram, and which kind of styles of fragrance are harder? Because I'm interested in the concept that as Instagram gains more and more influence, there will be certain tropes within perfumery that become more successful solely because they're easier to communicate through Instagram. And here I'm thinking of the idea that a perfume that is based on a lot of naturals will become more successful because a beautiful like lemon or like bergamot on the Amalfi Coast is really nice to look at. The idea that a fragrance that is inspired by a setting, a very specific setting, will become more important and sales will generate because seeing like a lovely like ocean spray and like northern Scotland is a great thing to look at. But something like a perfume that is very technically great and successful based on synthetics that you can't really represent, well, that's not going to sell because who wants to look at a molecule on Instagram? Have you guys got any kind of thoughts on categories of fragrance that do well visually?
I wanted to say that I think we have it easy today. I think Patrick Susskind did the impossible by using words to describe smell. And this is before Instagram, this is before movies and videos and everything. So I think if you can do it with words, I think we have it really easy with what we have today. But I totally agree with you, just the idea that naturals, most people have the concept of what a rose smells like or jasmine. That automatically speaks to the perfume user. But yeah, going into the synthetics, I think that's almost impossible to do, but I guess that's our future challenge to do so.
And in terms of challenges, Marta, I mean, I wanted to ask you, have you got any ideas about how industries in general, but then the perfumery industry specifically, can harness Instagram to better communication, to better sales? Like, is there anything that the fragrance industry and other industries where experience is essential, is there anything they're not doing that you think they should be doing on Instagram?
Yeah, I think that they should do more educational through Instagram to their public, to potential customer, about the story of the perfume, maybe also about what's behind the perfume, and that can be do with Instagram. So it's tied to what I said before, and it's about experience, not using the perfume, but before how it's made. So what are the values that I wear when I choose to buy that perfume? Of course, tied to what the other speaker said, I find personally, with my experience with campaigns on social networks and Instagram, that floral perfumes are the easiest to communicate because product placement there is sufficient. For all those perfumes that have complex ingredients and formulas, the communication is tied to feelings. This perfume makes you feel beautiful. It makes you feel richer. It makes you feel courageous. It's all about something that I want to be. And the aesthetic is about that.
It seems like with the niche perfumery in particular, you really have to kind of be a jack of all trades. So how do you communicate things, even visually, if you're not also a photographer or a painter, and if you don't have much of a budget to create these things? And what if you're not very good with words, and can you hire somebody to come in, and what if the copy's not exactly really doing the thing that you're evoking? And so I think that, I think in some ways the more successful brands are doing things outside of their comfort zones, I suppose, to try to communicate, fragrance. But it does seem like within your own means, it's like 20 years ago, we got all of this information on television or in magazines, and I think actually it's because of Instagram and social media and the internet that actually the niche world is a success, and people are able to, they don't have to buy an ad in Vogue.
I mean, following on from that, in terms of talking about frameworks that then spurn on certain cultural interests, do you actually think that Instagram, Facebook, or just the digitalization and digital culture that we live in is blanket positive for the perfume industry? Because Luca Turin can argue with me as much as he wants, but I haven't seen any concrete evidence that fragrance can be digitalized at the moment, and people often reference it as one of the last bastions of human culture that has to be experienced intimately on location, and many credit this with the continued growth of the fragrance industry even during the recession. So do you think that digital culture and the proliferation of Instagram is just great because people will get bored of visual experiences they can take on any time, and that's why they value olfactory experiences? What do you guys think?
Well, okay, here's the thing. I started 13 years ago with my brand, micro brand back then. back then it was the time of the blogging. Okay, the internet was very disruptive in the sense that you as a one-man show, one-woman show could communicate with the entire world, with potential clients. There was a dialogue, and for press that did all the perfume talking before, this was like a nightmare, and they still haven't recovered from their nightmare. Then came Facebook. Contrary to the blogging, where there were intense discussions, long pages and pages and pages of comments where people were discussing notes and ideas and everything, Facebook was shorter, was faster, but still there was communication happening in words about products, feelings, whatever. And then came Instagram, and the words became even less, and we have now pictures. And for me, talking from a niche in a niche, the digitalization that we have seen the last 15 years is the only way how I could ever start, build a brand and keep on growing with the brand. It's the only way, especially these days where you have all the big ones buying all the small ones that were made to be bought by the big ones and that are filling the perfumeries worldwide. So this is our way to kind of speak to clients and to connect to them.
Well, unless you guys have any burning last comments, you want to say something? Okay.
I have, first of all, House of Sarah Baker, follow me. But now, I did want to actually bring up one last thing, is that humor in perfumery. I feel there's a little bit of a lapse there. And so one thing that I would encourage all of us to start doing is the perfume meme, which if you go onto my Instagram account, you can see some. You can play Perfumers Bingo. And I just think also that the meme is such a wonderful contemporary phenomenon. I mean, without Instagram and Facebook, this wouldn't exist. So I think in some ways we can now communicate a lot more on these specific preferences that in the perfumery world it's maybe insider jokes, but why not?
Let's give it a go. Maybe we'll go to Q&A now. If there are any questions about Instagram, social media, and Facebook, or if you have any questions for Andy, Alex, Sarah about fragrance brands, or Marta for social media. Do we have a microphone?
Hi, yes, I had a question about when you were talking about simple fragrances as opposed to complex fragrances, and if they would please more or get more hits or something. And I don't know enough about how my brain works, but I have a feeling that it works, even mine, works really much faster than we can imagine. And so that I can look at either a very simple picture or I can look at a very complex picture, and my brain will take it in and find enormous satisfaction, or not. And it can be enormous satisfaction from a very simple photo or from a very complex photo. The same for a perfume. And that what I find about the social media is that I can zap from ZAP from one image that can be extremely complex. I say, oh God, I really love that. And then, as you said, 2 seconds later, you zapped on his film of wrapping his packages or whatever. And you thought, oh God, that's really cool. And 3 seconds later, you were in another one and you were zapped on that. And this is, I think the social media is as much about zapping as anything else. And in a way, I think that helps the perfume industry because one of the things, and maybe it's just me, but I don't think it is, I love to zap. And I will zap on this fragrance, and then I might zap on another one, like here we are here. I can just go crazy about 40 fragrances in an hour. And I will zap on them. And then I might zap on them for that whole day, and then the next day I'll keep 2 of them. But I will have had access to enormous volume that I think that unconsciously later, our brains are going to process this even though we only zapped on it for 3 seconds. That's my thought. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, thank you for your comment. I do understand the kind of the place you're coming from in terms of like immediacy and how people scroll so quickly, but the advantage is that social media often offers diversity. I just have one comment on that, which is that I think it can do, depending on how you consciously decide to curate your own social media use. Now, Marta, correct me if I'm wrong, but like one trend I saw within my age group anyway was that when I was a teenager when Facebook first blew up in the UK, and then everyone got Facebook and just added everyone they knew and everyone they didn't know, and then their dogs and their cousins and like just everyone. And then by the time I'm like 18, 19, we all have like 3,000 friends on Facebook. We don't know any of them. It's totally pointless. And there's been a big trend. I've seen a lot of articles recently commenting that people are cutting their friends list, and then that Gen Z, which I'm not part of, is not even using social media for this reason. So I think you can curate diversity if you want and be specialized, but a lot of people aren't. And the danger that you have with social media, which I think can affect the fragrance industry depending on how people engage with fragrance brands, is that it's a very internally facing cycle that can be hard to get out of. You have a feed with 100 pages that you like, for which your interests are probably somewhat synchronized or somewhat aligned. Those content creators put out images that you want to see because they've liked your page. And you like the images even more because they're putting out content that you want to see. So in reality, you really don't have diversity within social media. So that's my comment on it.
Actually, Eddie's remarks are very true. So here's what I do. I think people out there are incredibly bored. Okay, a lot of people spend a lot of time just scrolling through pictures. And my job, besides creating perfumes, is to entertain them. Because my goal is that they spend a lot of time with my pictures, and that a lot of pictures stick in their mind. And there I agree with you, so that when someone sees Andy Tower, immediately knows, okay, Andy Tower makes the pentagonal bottles. By the way, you can follow me too, Andy _ Tower. So yes, people zap because they are bored. And what I do is I look at my Instagram channel regularly, like every week. I do the statistics, I look at which picture performed, I look at which hashtag performs how, and I adjust my channel according to the likes and the engagement rates. Because I know this is my job as entertainer, to keep people happy.
If I could just add one little comment before the next question, please. In formulation, there is a new term that we use in our industry. Again, back to evaluation, is this word of addiction. We have this trend of gourmand, this edible trend, and the trend is thankfully subsiding, and we're going to have maybe more florals in the future. But we still return to this word addiction. And every time, again, I create perfume, my evaluator is asking me, is it addictive enough? When I talk about addiction, it's not necessarily maltol, which was used in Angel or in La Vie est Belle, but the idea is, does it suck the person in? Does it make that person want to stay 2 or 3 seconds longer in your perfume? And this is just a factor that we actually consider in that creative process. And addiction is not because it's vanilla, because it's sweet, but it could be musky, it could be because it's fruity. There's other ways of expressing addiction, and we think about it when we construct our perfumes, because we want that consumer to not zap our perfume, and we want that person to smell a little bit longer and to try to find the real beauty of our perfume. So it's a notion that we actually do think about when we create our perfumes.
Yeah, great answer. Any more questions? Hario.
Actually, I wanted to add to what Eddie said, and second, what you said about, say, the social media being or creating biotopes that are isolated or like worlds of their own. And I just wanted to add that since I had a talk about algorithms in perfumery 2 days ago, so it's not only the way that the selection of images that we put out in order to entertain, but it's also within the system of social media with collaborative filtering. So the algorithms will filter in order to display the pictures that are relevant for your peers. So there is, even from a technological point of view, an extra border or limitation to trespass.
Yeah, no, fantastic point. I forgot about that. And conspiracy theorists also like that kind of idea, but exactly, the algorithms control us. But it's a great point. Any more questions?
I would like to actually expand on that a little bit.
Go for it.
Andy mentioned that do you use Unum, the app, to determine how well your Instagram posts are performing?
I use a couple of apps.
Oh, okay. What apps? Okay, so while he's checking, because Command. I use an app called Unum, but I only just actually started checking to see how well my posts performed, because I know regarding the algorithm, I know that there are certain things that will do better than others, and there are certain like posts that I know will get more likes than others. Like if I post a picture of myself, I know inevitably people are just going to have pity on me and they're going to like it. But or if I did a picture of a cat or something, that people are going to like those pictures. So I actually don't determine what I'm going to post based on likes, and I think that's also coming from an artist's perspective, is that I don't just make work that I think people are going to like. I make work to fulfill like my vision and my ambition, and actually I treat this is probably an unusual circumstance, but I do actually treat my Instagram account a little bit like an art piece. To me, it's very visual, but regarding the algorithm, it's a little bit of a mystery, but clearly, it's definitely influential.
Yeah, no, and what you said, I don't think it's unusual at all. I mean, I think more and more people are treating their Instagrams not like they used to treat their Facebook, which was a reflection of their personal life, but a curated, designed, very thought out kind of art project almost. I had an old colleague in my office who was given like a really pretty gingerbread man one day, and he took 45 minutes off work to go to the roof with some white paper where there was natural sunlight so you could get a great picture with the color scheme he needed of the gingerbread man. So, because Alex, you've even started a new kind of artistic project on Instagram. Do you want to plug that quickly?
So, what's really interesting is that, while we now know that there is a perfumer behind the perfume, when you talk to new people who don't really know our industry, they have this vision that the perfumer is wearing a white blouse and he has his goggles and he's in the lab and crazy hair, and there's this kind of a pharmaceutical kind of vision of what our work is like. And in Perfumery, we use blotters, which are these white blotters. It's our second skin. We don't have enough skin in our company to try all our trials, so that's our main tool. And in all the pictures, we see the perfumer with the white blotter strip. And I thought, there needs to be more color in Perfumery, and we're actually more colorful. So I kind of partnered with a paper company. I started making colored paper blotters like this. And I'm creating new art based on these blotters. It's just a new project. It's for fun. So it's Perfume X Paper. Again, it's kind of humorous, a bit tongue-in-cheek, just art based on beautiful blotter paper. Perfume X Paper.
So if there are any more questions, maybe we could take one or two. Okay, one at the back.
Okay, so I have a question. First off, thank you. It was super interesting. And I guess it's more about not about the micro, but the macro of Instagram, where I see Instagram creating larger trends that end up affecting perfume as well. starting from like a control and optimization of like the self, the environment, and your self-presentation, which definitely extends to like personal and home fragrance. But also, aside from like visuality, I guess I'm interested in visibility. So I guess in a more positive view of Instagram, I have seen that like past just like mainstream lifestyle grammars, but like young, raw people on Instagram there's so many different ecosystems on Instagram, and so I feel like that's led to a multiplicity of like visual like identities of the self and that kind of visibility, and I've seen that reflected in like the gender binary breakdown in culture. I really do directly attribute to Instagram, and I think that marketers have jumped on that like non-binary and also wanting to have more diversity of visual representation of people, and so I wonder if, with like that kind of democratic visual representation of like previously unseen people, whether that's like trans or people of color, and marketers jumping on board, if that's also had an effect on fragrance brands and mainstream fragrance brands and companies also creating and really directly marketing non-gendered fragrances. And if that, I don't know, like wondering if you see that as also having an effect, and like that kind of bigger picture of like, is like perfume also getting shifted by that kind of change?
No, I think that the fact that you use the word ecosystem is actually very apt, because it does have rules. It can be tampered with the way images and meanings are interpreted and used across cultures. I think your point of Instagram and social media giving a voice to the marginalized is an excellent one, and of course it does, and normally that's positive, but you're right, it is also commodified, and that is somewhat of the irony. And also, just to further that point, and to kind of demonstrate it, I think often, and the point I was trying to make in the presentation as well, is that authentic voices are also lost because there's so much noise about marginalization. So that these kind of identities become commodified and put into a certain type of cultural economy in which people are exploiting that marginalization. To kind of ground what I'm saying, there was an article in The Guardian by a journalist called Kyle Chaka, I think, where he was talking about hipster identity, which isn't the same as what we're talking about, but there's an overlap. And he described the new aesthetic and that places like Soho House are responsible for, and most of the Airbnbs you go to, as airspace. This sense of communal uniqueness, that everyone's the same, but everyone's different at the same time. And I think you've kind of identified this irony. And to a certain extent, the irony does also exist within perfumery, a tension between personalization and individuality against authorship. People want master perfumers to create finished compositions, but they also want to mess with them and kind of change the top notes so it's more unique. So for me, I see it more as a tension rather than an answer. I'm not sure if that covers your question at all.
I follow Monroe Bergdorf on Instagram, and she is a black trans woman model who's just recently got more surgery to make herself look more feminine, and she's also an activist, and but she's a fashion model, and she posted an image recently saying, if you're going to use my identity, if you're going to use what that person stands for, you have to take the whole person. So I think she's actually a really interesting person to follow, but I totally get where you're going with that regarding gendered perfumery, because I do feel that's outdated personally.
Is there a last question? Okay, we'll take one more.
So just because we're more of a kind of niche audience here, given where we are, I kind of got to thinking that sort of, let's suppose that this influence of Instagram making perfumes kind of, if not easier, at least more clear or easier to understand or easier to pick up in kind of a really quick way, is true. I've always found that, kind of looking back historically, the dominant trend influences a really strong sub-trend. So I've been kind of, watching perfumes for the past 15 to 20 years, let's say, as an observer. And it's really interesting to note that, at least from my perception, a lot of these kind of soliflor or single note dominated perfumes, or these perfumes that might fit into this kind of idea of easy to understand and easy to grasp, first kind of came out of the niche space, right? You'd had a lot of niche brands in the early 2000s, mid 2000s that were doing these patchouli, or this or the other. So I was wondering that if this trend is going to influence, let's say, 80% of perfumes now, would the new niche space actually be a complete rebellion against that? And that's where we're going to see a lot of the stuff that doesn't fit into that category. So extremely complex, very difficult to kind of show visually, just essentially the antithesis of what we've been talking about, if you think that might be a kind of like, a battery that could propel that idea kind of being rebirthed again, or birthed again in a new form of niche 2.0 or 3.0 maybe.
One of you guys want to jump in? Or? I mean, my initial response is, again, a very apt point. I agree entirely with you. In order not to sound like I'm not answering the question, but I think you've identified another tension within niche, and I think Silvio would probably agree with me to say that there are a lot of tensions in the business model and creative output of niche perfumery at the moment that mean that it is still uncertain the direction it's going in. Many niche brands still aren't making money. You have the big distributors that put so much emphasis and hope for those brands to be successful, and Frederic Malle is still not proving to Estee Lauder that it's making the money necessarily that it would need to, would be my assumption. So I think that the future that you've suggested is very possible, that there will be a niche in the form of extremely complex, extremely intellectual fragrances in 10 years. To give an example on that, I recently came across a release called Feminista, a tiny company, and the idea behind that the fragrance was supposed to evoke the values and feeling of feminism. And it's almost like a joke, because how is that in any way possible? But the important thing is that it's happening. Someone has tried to make a fragrance that communicates feminism. Like, this is a new form of olfactory culture that I never saw before. It was very important to me. On the other end, Jo Malone London is winning. So I see a tension, and I don't know where it's going to go.
Maybe just 2 or 3 words. It's a complex topic, of course. So my experience is that I can create any fragrance I want, basically. It can be as shocking as I would like to have it, as complex as I would like to have it, but I cannot sell it. Okay? Because at the end of the day, I want to sell in order to make money. I sometimes make perfumes that I don't sell, but it's a fact. You have to sell. And then the question is, if we are talking about niche or selective perfumery, I mean, how do you speak to your potential clients, and how do they hear from you? And if you don't use Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and don't work with the bloggers, then you're alone. The press will not talk about you because you don't have to buy the money to get being talked about. And one last word, I mean, we are talking now about the new niche. Maybe we should wait until the old niche has died first. Okay, it's happening,
Andy,
right?
Andy, you're not dying anytime soon. It's fine. Just stick around.
No, but on a serious note, I mean, it's a little bit sad, but I have kind of a reputation for being very honest about things. I mean, niche is dying these days. There are a lot of brands that are dying. They are disappearing. They don't sell. We could also discuss whether it has to do with the social media, because we have a saying that the press follows you upwards and the press follows you downwards, and the same might be true for the social media. So they're winners and they're losers.
Yeah, good point. Come back next year to see future of niche. I just want to take this opportunity to thank the panelists once again for being here today in Milan and for participating, and thanks for the audience to come in. So.